In a room filled with New York's elite, worth over $50 billion combined, the most valuable person was the one being treated like invisible furniture. They called him broken. They called him a liability. But Eleanor, a waitress with $3 in her bank account, saw something the billionaires missed. She didn't just serve him a drink, she broke the strictest rule of the night. She asked the untouchable, autistic son of the city's most feared tycoon to dance. What happened in the next 5 minutes didn't just silence the room. It destroyed an empire, exposed a massive conspiracy, and changed the definition of power forever. This is the story of the dance that shook the world. The tray of crystal champagne flutes was heavier than it looked, especially when balanced on a wrist that had been sprained 2 days ago moving furniture. Elena Russo adjusted her grip, forcing a polite, invisible smile onto her face. The rule at the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom was simple. Be a ghost. If the guests noticed you, you were failing. If they spoke to you, it was usually to complain. Tonight was the Gilded Horizon Gala, a charity event hosted by Thorn Heavy Industries. The entry ticket alone cost more than Elena's entire year of rent in Queens. The air smelled of expensive lilies, roasted duck, and the distinct metallic scent of old money. "Keep moving, Russo," the floor manager, Mr. Henderson, hissed into her earpiece. "Table 4 needs a refill, and don't look at Mr. Thorne. He's in a mood." Silas Thorne. The name was synonymous with steel, shipping, and ruthlessness. He was a man who allegedly ate competitors for breakfast. He stood near the orchestra pit, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking like a king surveying a kingdom he despised. But Eleanor wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were drawn to the shadow behind him. Sitting on a velvet bench, slightly removed from the main cluster of tuxedoed men, was a young man who looked to be about 24. He was handsome, with sharp jawlines that mirrored his father's, but his body language was entirely different. He wore a tuxedo that cost thousands, but he was rocking back and forth, a rhythmic, subtle motion. He had noise-cancelling headphones around his neck, not quite on his ears, but ready. His fingers were tapping a frantic pattern against his thigh. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This was Julian Thorne, the problem. The rumor mill in the kitchen had been buzzing about him all night. "He's crazy," one busboy had said. "Not crazy, just R-worded," a dishwasher had replied cruelly. "Silas hides him away in a mansion upstate. Doesn't want the stock prices to drop because his heir can't tie his shoes." Eleanor had stayed silent during the kitchen gossip, but watching him now, her heart ached. She recognized the look in his eyes. It wasn't emptiness. It was sensory overload. The clinking of silverware, the roar of laughter, the string quartet. It was likely hitting him like physical blows. She made her way to table 4, pouring champagne for a group of socialites led by Bianca St. James. Bianca was the kind of woman who was famous simply for being famous, an heiress to a hotel fortune who treated scandal like a currency. "It's embarrassing, really," Bianca said, her voice carrying intentionally loud. She gestured with her manicured hand toward Julian. "Silas brings him out once a year to show he's a family man. But look at him. He's twitching like a glitching computer. It ruins the aesthetic of the evening." The men at the table chuckled nervously. "He's harmless, Bianca." "He's a waste of a legacy," Bianca snapped, sipping her drink without even acknowledging Elena pouring it. "Imagine Thorn Industries going to that. I heard he doesn't even speak. He just hums. If I were Silas, I'd have put him in a nice institution in Switzerland years ago." Elena's hand trembled. A drop of champagne missed the glass and landed on the white tablecloth, a tiny, dime-sized spot. Bianca gasped, as if she'd been shot. "You clumsy idiot! That's vintage lace!" "I'm so sorry, Mom," Elena whispered, grabbing her napkin. "Get away from me," Bianca hissed, shoving Elena's hand away. "Just go. You people are incompetent." Elena retreated, cheeks burning. She backed away toward the periphery of the room, near the velvet bench where Julian sat. She needed a moment to breathe before Mr. Henderson fired her. She looked down. Julian had stopped rocking. He was looking at her. No, not at her face, at her shoes, her cheap, rubber-soled work shoes. He looked up, meeting her eyes. His gaze was intense, piercing, and terrifyingly intelligent. It wasn't the vacant look the staff had described. He looked trapped. A drunk investor stumbled past, bumping into Julian's knees. "Watch it, retard," the man muttered, spilling a bit of scotch on Julian's sleeve. Julian flinched violently, his hands coming up to cover his ears, a low, keening sound escaping his throat. The investor laughed and kept walking. Silas Thorne, the father, was 20 feet away, embroiled in a conversation about tariffs, his back turned to his son. Nobody moved. The room saw it happen, and they did exactly what high society does best. They pretended nothing was happening. They ignored the distress of a human being because it was socially inconvenient to acknowledge it. Elena felt a heat rise in her chest that had nothing to do with embarrassment and everything to do with rage. She knew what it was like to be invisible. She knew what it was like to be treated as less than human because you didn't fit the mold. She put her tray down on an empty side table. "Russo, what are you doing?" Mr. Henderson's voice crackled in her ear. "Get back to the bar." Elena took the earpiece out and dropped it on the tray. She walked over to the velvet bench. Julian was hyperventilating now, his eyes squeezed shut, the rhythm of his rocking increasing. He was on the verge of a meltdown. Elena didn't touch him. She knew better. She stepped into his line of sight and crouched down, ignoring the strain in her knees until she was eye level with him. "The patterns on the ceiling are interesting, aren't they?" she said softly. Her voice was calm, distinct amidst the roar of the party. Julian's eyes snapped open. He looked at her, then up at the ceiling. The plaza's ceiling was a complex, geometric fresco. "Fibonacci," Julian whispered. His voice was gravelly from disuse, but clear. "The spiral, it's wrong in the corner." Elena smiled. "I noticed that too. They missed a curve." Julian stared at her. For the first time all night, his shoulders dropped an inch. He wasn't being scolded or ignored or pitied. He was being engaged. The string quartet transitioned into a slow, melodic waltz. Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was soft, flowing, and predictable. Elena saw the way Julian's fingers twitched to the piano notes. He felt the music. He understood the math of it. Elena stood up. She knew she was about to lose her job. She knew she might get blacklisted from every catering company in New York. But she looked at Bianca St. James, watching from across the room with a sneer, and she made a choice. She extended a hand, palm open, keeping a respectful distance. "The music is logical," Elena said to him. "It follows a pattern. Would you help me count the steps? Would you like to dance?" The room seemed to freeze. A hush rippled outward from their corner as people realized what the waitress was doing. Bianca St. James stopped drinking. Even the orchestra seemed to hesitate. Julian looked at her hand. Then he looked at his father's back. Then he looked at the hostile crowd. Slowly, shakily, Julian Thorne stood up. He was tall, well over 6 feet. He didn't take her hand, but he stepped into the space in front of her. He nodded once. 1, 2, 3, he whispered. 1, 2, 3, Elena repeated. And they began to move. It wasn't a traditional waltz. They didn't hold each other in the standard frame. Julian couldn't handle the touch of a stranger. Instead, they moved in perfect synchronization, separated by 6 inches of air. They mirrored each other. When Eleanor stepped back, Julian stepped forward. When she turned, he turned in exact geometric opposition. It was beautiful. It was strange. It was raw. Julian's movements, previously seen as twitchy, transformed into a fluid, mathematical expression of the music. He wasn't clumsy. He was precise. He was moving to the exact beat, anticipating the crescendos before they happened. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The clinking of forks had stopped. The gossip had died. 300 of the wealthiest people in America were watching a waitress in a stained uniform dance with the broken air. He's dancing," someone whispered. Silas Thorne turned around. The glass of scotch in his hand slipped. It hit the marble floor with a shattering crash that echoed through the silent hall. The sound broke the spell. The music stopped abruptly as the conductor noticed Silas's reaction. Julian froze, his face contorting in panic at the sudden noise of the shattering glass. The magical bubble Elena had created popped instantly. "What is the meaning of this?" Silas Thorne's voice boomed. He didn't sound angry. He sounded terrified, though it came out as aggression. He stormed over, his heavy footsteps thudding on the floor. Julian shrank back, covering his ears again. Loud, loud, loud. Elena stepped between them. It was a reflex. She put her small frame between the titan of industry and his son. "He was just enjoying the music, sir," Elena said, her voice shaking but chin high. "He understands the rhythm better than anyone here." "You?" Silas looked at her, as if she were a roach on his dinner plate. "Who are you to touch my son?" "I didn't touch him," Elena said firmly. "I asked him to dance, which is more than anyone else in this room has done in the last 4 hours." A collective gasp went through the crowd. You did not speak to Silas Thorne that way. Bianca St. James seized her moment. She marched over, her heels clicking like gunshots. "Silas, this woman is drunk. I saw her spill champagne earlier, and now she's molesting poor Julian just to make a scene. She's trying to get a settlement, obviously." "That's a lie," Elena cried out. "Security," Silas barked. 2 large men in black suits materialized from the shadows. "Get her out of here," Silas growled, his face red. He looked at Julian, who was now rocking violently again. "And get Julian to the car, immediately." "No!" Julian shouted. It was the loudest he had spoken in years. He looked at Elena. "Pattern. She knows the pattern." "Julian, stop it!" Silas snapped, grabbing his son's arm. Julian recoiled, pulling away, and in the chaos, he knocked into a pedestal holding a massive floral arrangement. The vase tipped. Water and heavy ceramic crashed toward Bianca. Bianca shrieked and jumped back, but the water soaked the hem of her $10,000 Dior gown. "He attacked me!" Bianca screamed, playing to the crowd. "Did you see that? The freak attacked me!" "Get him out!" Silas roared, humiliated. The security guards grabbed Eleanor by the arms. They weren't gentle. They dragged her backward. "You don't have to drag me, I'm walking!" Eleanor shouted, struggling. She locked eyes with Julian one last time. He looked devastated. He looked like the door to the world had opened for a second, and then slammed shut. 1, 2, 3, Elena mouthed to him. Julian's lips moved, mimicking her. Elena was hauled out the service exit and thrown, literally thrown, onto the damp pavement of 58th Street. "Don't come back, or we'll have you arrested for trespassing," the head of security spat, tossing her purse onto the ground next to her. Elena sat on the cold concrete, her knees scraped, her uniform ruined. She had lost her job. She would likely be evicted next week. She had humiliated the most powerful man in New York. She put her head in her hands and began to cry. but she didn't know that inside the ballroom, someone had been recording. A teenage daughter of a tech mogul had live-streamed the entire dance and the subsequent brutality on TikTok. By the time Elena wiped her eyes and stood up to catch the subway back to Queens, the video titled "The Waitress" and the air had 400,000 views. The next morning, Elena woke up to the sound of pounding on her apartment door. She groaned, looking at her phone. It was dead. She had forgotten to charge it. "Coming!" she yelled, pulling on a robe. She assumed it was the landlord, Mr. Gower, coming to ask for the rent she didn't have. She opened the door, ready to beg for an extension. It wasn't Mr. Gower. Standing in her dingy, dimly lit hallway was a man in a charcoal grey suit. He was holding a briefcase. Behind him stood two other men. And behind them, looking terrified and out of place in the peeling hallway, was Julian Thorne. Elena froze. "What?" The man in the suit adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Russo, my name is Arthur Penn. I am the personal attorney for Mr. Silas Thorne." Elena tried to slam the door. "I didn't steal anything. If Bianca said I hurt her, she's lying." Arthur Penn put a hand out to stop the door. "We aren't here to sue you, Miss Russo." Elena paused. She looked at Julian. He was wearing a hoodie and noise-cancelling headphones, looking at the peeling paint on her doorframe. "Then why are you here?" "Julian refused to eat breakfast," Arthur said. His voice strained. "He refused to get in the car. He refused to look at his father. He has said only one thing for the last 8 hours." Arthur sighed and looked at the billionaire's son. Julian looked up at Elena. His eyes were clear. He pointed at her. "Pattern?" Julian said. "Need the pattern?" Arthur cleared his throat. "Mr. Thorne would like to offer you a job, a very specific job. He wants you to be Julian's companion, and he is willing to pay you $20,000 a month to do it." Elena's jaw dropped. What? "But there is a catch," Arthur added, his eyes narrowing. "You have to sign an NDA, and you have to live in the Thorne estate. Because frankly, Ms. Russo, Mr. Thorne believes you are a con artist who manipulated his son, and he wants to keep you where he can watch you." Elena looked at Julian. He wasn't looking at the lawyer. He was holding out a fidget spinner toward her. A peace offering. She looked at the eviction notice on her counter. She looked at the checkbook that said $3,000, and she looked at the young man who just wanted someone to count with him. "I'll pack my bag," Elena said. The Thorne estate wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum built for the living. Located in the rolling hills of the Hudson Valley, an hour north of the city, it was a sprawling architecture of black stone and reinforced glass. The locals called it the Iron Citadel. Elena sat in the back of the town car, clutching her meager bag of belongings. Beside her, Julian sat perfectly still, his eyes closed, his fingers tracing the leather stitching of the seat in a repetitive loop. When the car pulled up to the massive front doors, Silas Thorne was waiting. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by Mrs. Gable, a housekeeper with a face carved from granite, and a man in a white coat who looked less like a doctor and more like a scientist. "Get out," Silas commanded. Elena stepped out into the crisp air. The silence here was heavy, oppressive. "Rules," Silas said, not bothering with a greeting. 1, you are here to keep him calm. 2, you do not speak to the press. 3, you do not leave the grounds. 4, you administer his medication at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. sharply. If you miss a dose by 5 minutes, you are fired and I will sue you for breach of contract." He signaled to the man in the white coat. "This is Dr. Orris. He manages Julian's condition." Dr. Orris smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Pleasure, Miss Russo. Julian has a very fragile neurochemistry. Routine is God. Deviation is poison. Do we understand each other?" "I understand," Elena said, though a cold shiver went down her spine. She was shown to her room, a guest suite that was nicer than any apartment she'd ever lived in, yet felt like a prison cell. Then she was taken to Julian's wing. It was stark white. The furniture was bolted to the floor. There were no sharp edges, no colors, no art. It looked like a high-end asylum. Julian walked into the room and immediately went to the corner, sitting on a weighted beanbag chair. "He stays in here most of the day," Mrs. Gable said, standing at the door. "For his own safety, meals are brought on plastic trays." Elena looked at the room. It was devoid of stimulation. "He's bored," she said. Mrs. Gable scoffed. "He doesn't feel boredom, Miss Russo. He requires low stimulation." "No," Elena said, remembering the way he had looked at the ceiling patterns at the plaza. "He requires logical stimulation. This isn't calm. It's sensory deprivation." "You are a waitress," Mrs. Gable sneered. "Dr. Aris is a specialist from Vienna. I suggest you stay in your lane." That evening, the first test came. It was 8:00 p.m. Elena was handed a small paper cup with 2 blue pills. She walked into Julian's room. He was humming a low, vibrating note. "Julian?" she said softly. He stopped humming. He didn't look at her. "They want you to take these," she said, holding out the cup. Julian looked at the pills. A look of genuine fear crossed his face. He shook his head. "Fog," he whispered. "Makes the numbers blurry." Elena paused. "The pills make the numbers blurry?" "Can't see the pattern," Julian said, his voice rising in panic. "Don't make me. Please, the fog hurts." Elena looked at the pills, then at the camera blinking in the corner of the ceiling. She knew Silas was watching. She had to be smart. She sat down next to him, keeping that respectful 6-inch distance. "If you take them, will you sleep?" "Sleep is black. No dreams. Just erased," Julian said. Elena made a decision. It was dangerous, reckless, and could land her in jail. She turned her back to the camera, pretending to hand him the water glass. With a sleight of hand, she had perfected hiding tips from greedy shift managers. She palmed the pills. "Drink the water, Julian," she said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. Julian looked at her, confused. He saw her closed fist. He understood. He drank the water. "Good," Elena said, standing up and pocketing the pills. "Now let's count." For the next 2 hours they didn't sleep. Elena found a deck of cards in her bag. She sat on the floor and laid them out. "Fibonacci?" she asked. Julian's eyes lit up. "Yes. Sequence." He rearranged the cards with blinding speed. Then he started stacking them. Not just a house of cards, but a complex, defying gravity structure that looked like a suspension bridge. His hands were steady. His eyes were bright. Without the medicine, he wasn't twitching. He was focusing. Elena watched him, realizing the terrifying truth. The medication wasn't treating his autism. It was sedating his brilliance. They weren't trying to help him. They were trying to turn him off. But why? 2 weeks passed. Elena continued her dangerous game. She pocketed the morning and evening pills, flushing them down her toilet. The change in Julian was miraculous, though she had to help him hide it. When Silas or Dr. Aris were around, Julian learned to keep his head down and rock slightly, playing the part of the broken boy. But when the heavy oak doors were closed, he was alive. He spoke more. His vocabulary was extensive, archaic, and precise. He read books at a speed Elena couldn't comprehend, finishing a 500-page history of the Roman Empire in an hour. But the biggest breakthrough happened on a rainy Tuesday. Silas was away in Tokyo for business. The house was relatively quiet. Elena decided to take a risk. She led Julian out of the White Wing and down to the main library. It was a cavernous room filled with the smell of old paper and leather. Julian stopped in the center of the room, spinning slowly, taking in the geometry of the bookshelves. "Symmetrical?" he murmured. Except for the third shelf on the left. It's sagging 0.4 inches. "You have laser eyes," Elena joked. On the massive mahogany desk, stacks of financial reports were piled high, Silas's private work. Julian walked over to the desk. Elena started to stop him. "Julian, we shouldn't touch those." But he was already staring at the open ledger. It was a quarterly report for Thorn Heavy Industries. Julian's finger traced the columns of numbers. His eyes darted back and forth. "Wrong," he said. "What's wrong?" Elena asked, coming closer. "The sum," Julian said. "The EBITDA for the logistics division. It doesn't match the raw input data from the shipping manifest summary on page 4. Julian, these are audited by major accounting firms. They don't make mistakes." "It's not a mistake," Julian said, his voice turning cold. "It's a subtraction, a deliberate variable. Look." He grabbed a fountain pen. "Julian, no!" He ignored her. On a notepad next to the ledger, he began to write. It wasn't just numbers. It was a complex algorithmic proof. "Shipping container volume is constant," he muttered. "Fuel costs are variable but follow a trend line. The expenditure reported is 40% higher than the maximum theoretical cost of fuel. Money is missing. It's leaving the system." "How much money?" Elena whispered. Julian tapped the paper. $420 million over 3 years. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Someone was embezzling nearly $500 million from Silas Thorne's company. Suddenly, the library doors creaked open. Elena snatched the pen from Julian's hand and threw the notepad under a magazine. It was Bianca St. James. She wasn't alone. She was walking with Arthur Penn, the lawyer who had hired Elena. They looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Arthur's hand was resting on the small of Bianca's back. They jumped apart when they saw Elena. "What are you doing in here?" Bianca snapped, her face twisting into a scowl. "This is a restricted area." "Julian wanted a book," Elena lied smoothly. "He likes the pictures in the encyclopedias." Bianca walked over, her eyes scanning the desk. She looked at Julian, who immediately reverted to rocking back and forth, staring at his shoes. "Get him back to his cage," Bianca said, disgust dripping from her voice. "Arthur and I have wedding planning to discuss. Silas wants me to pick the flowers for the spring gala." "Wedding?" Elena asked. "Oh, you didn't know?" Bianca smirked, flashing a massive diamond ring. "Silas and I are engaged. He proposed before he left for Tokyo. I'm going to be Julian's stepmother. And let me tell you, things are going to change around here. We won't need a $20,000 babysitter when I'm in charge. I know a lovely facility in Vermont that specializes in severe cases." Arthur Penn looked nervous. He kept glancing at the financial reports on the desk. "Bianca, let's go to the parlor," Arthur said quickly. "No," Bianca said, stepping closer to Eleanor. "I want to make sure the help understands her place." She leaned in, whispering so only Eleanor could hear. "I saw the TikTok, honey. You think you're Cinderella? You're just a temporary expense, and I'm about to cut the budget." She turned to Julian. "Stop that infernal rocking." She reached out to grab Julian's shoulder. Julian didn't flinch this time. He looked up, his eyes locked onto Arthur Penn. $400 million, Julian said clearly. The room went dead silent. Arthur Penn dropped his briefcase. "What did he say?" Arthur whispered, his face turning pale. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed Julian's arm. "He's quoting a movie, The $6 Million Man. We watched it yesterday. Come on, Julian." She dragged Julian out of the library, her heart racing. As they hurried down the hallway, Elena realized the truth. It wasn't Silas stealing the money. Silas was the victim. Arthur Penn, the trusted lawyer, and Bianca were draining the company dry, and the only person smart enough to see it was the boy they were drugging into silence. That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The staff seemed more aggressive. The guards outside the White Wing were doubled. Elena paced in her room. She knew Arthur Penn wasn't stupid. He had heard Julian. He knew that Julian wasn't as gone as the medical reports claimed. At 2:15 a.m., her door handle jiggled. It was locked. A key turned in the lock. Elena grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the bedside table. The door opened. It wasn't an assassin. It was Julian. He was wearing dark clothes, moving silently. He put a finger to his lips. "They are coming," he whispered. "Who?" "The men with the needles," Julian said. "I heard Dr. Aris on the phone. They are going to up the dosage. Permanent sleep, a coma induction." Elena dropped the lamp. They were going to lobotomize him chemically to keep him quiet. "We have to leave," Elena said. "Now." "The perimeter alarm is set," Julian said, "but the delivery gate opens at 3:15 a.m. for the bakery truck. 45-second window." "How do you know that?" "I counted the intervals," Julian said simply. Elena grabbed her coat and shoved her wallet and phone into her pocket. "Let's go." They moved through the darkened mansion like shadows. Elena realized that Julian wasn't a burden. He was the guide. He knew exactly which floorboards creaked. He knew the rotation of the security cameras, counting the seconds under his breath. 3, 2, 1, cross. They made it to the kitchen. The smell of rising dough filled the air. The back door was a heavy steel slab. "Wait," Julian said. He pointed to the keypad. "The code changes daily based on the date and the shift manager's employee ID." "Do you know the ID?" "I saw it on his badge 3 weeks ago," Julian said. He typed in a long string of numbers. Beep, click. The door hissed open. They slipped out into the cold night air, running toward the service gate. The bakery truck was just pulling in, its headlights cutting through the fog. As the truck passed through the gate, Elena and Julian sprinted through the gap behind it. "Hey!" a guard shouted from the booth. "Stop!" Sirens began to wail. The floodlights of the estate snapped on, turning the night into blinding day. "Run!" Elena screamed, grabbing Julian's hand. They scrambled down the embankment, sliding through mud and dead leaves, hitting the tree line just as the estate's SUVs roared out of the gate. They ran for a mile through the woods, Julian keeping a steady, athletic pace that surprised Elena. They emerged onto a secondary road. "My car isn't here," Elena panted. "We need a ride." A beat-up pickup truck was coming down the road. Elena ran into the middle of the lane, waving her arms. The truck screeched to a halt. An old farmer looked out. "Lady, you got a death wish." "Please," Elena begged. "We need to get to the city. We have money." She didn't really, but she hoped Silas's credit card, which she had been given for incidentals, hadn't been cancelled yet. The farmer looked at Julian, who was shivering, mud-streaked, but calm. "Hop in the back," the farmer grunted. As they sat in the bed of the truck, the wind whipping their hair, Julian looked at Elena. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the page from the library notepad. The proof of the embezzlement. "I kept the variable," Julian said. Elena laughed, a sound of pure relief and adrenaline. She wrapped her arm around him. He stiffened for a second, then relaxed, leaning his head on her shoulder. "You're brilliant, Julian Thorne," she said. "We are outliers," he replied. "Statistically unlikely." "Where are we going?" he asked after a moment. "To the one place your father hates more than anything," Elena said, her eyes hard. We're going to the press." The next morning, New York City woke up to a bombshell. But it wasn't the story Elena planned to tell. They were hiding in a cheap motel in the Bronx. Elena turned on the TV. Breaking news flashed on the screen. A photo of Elena's face, a mugshot from a parking ticket years ago, was plastered next to Julian's. "Kidnapped," the headline screamed. "Billionaire heir abducted by disgruntled employee." The news anchor's voice was grave. "Police are searching for Elena Russo, 26, who was seen fleeing the Thorne estate last night. Authorities warn that she is dangerous and may be manipulating Julian Thorne, who has severe cognitive disabilities and requires life-sustaining medication. Silas Thorne has offered a $5 million reward for the safe return of his son." Elena stared at the screen. "They spun it," she whispered. "They made me the villain." She looked at Julian. He was sitting on the motel bed, taking apart the motel's alarm clock and putting it back together. "They say I need the medicine," Julian said, not looking up. "If I don't go back, they will say you killed me." "I'm not taking you back there," Elena vowed. "Then we need a bigger variable," Julian said. He put the last screw into the clock. "My father respects leverage. We have the numbers, but we need a platform." Elena looked at her phone. The TikTok video from the dance was still viral. "We don't need a press conference," Elena realized. "We have the internet." She opened her bag and took out her phone. "Julian," she said, "do you trust me? The probability of you hurting me is less than 0.01%, he said. "Yes." "Then get ready," she said, hitting the record button. "We're going live." The motel room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap lemon cleaner. It was a stark contrast to the lilies and champagne of the plaza. But to Elena, it felt like the first breath of freedom she'd had in weeks. She propped her phone up against the base of the lamp, stacking a Bible and a takeout menu behind it to get the angle right. Her hands were shaking. "Are you ready?" she asked Julian. Julian was pacing the small room. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. He stopped and looked at the phone's black screen. "The variable is time," he said. "The police response time to a reported sighting is approximately 12 minutes in this district. We have 12 minutes to change the dataset." "Change the dataset?" "Public perception," Julian corrected. "If they think I am a victim, I lose. If they see I am the architect, I win." Elena hit go live. The screen flickered. The title she chose was simple: "The Truth About Julian Thorne." Because of the national manhunt, the algorithm pushed the notification instantly. 10 viewers, 500 viewers, 10,000 viewers. The counter spun so fast it blurred. Comments cascaded up the screen like a waterfall of digital noise. "Is that her? Run, girl! Kidnapper! Where is Julian?" Elena took a deep breath. She looked directly into the lens. She looked tired, her hair messy, wearing the same clothes from the night before. She didn't look like a villain. She looked desperate. "My name is Elena Russo," she began, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "The news says I kidnapped Julian Thorne. They say he is mentally incompetent. They say he needs to be medicated to survive." She turned the camera slightly. Julian stepped into the frame. He wasn't rocking. He wasn't hiding. He was wearing his hoodie, looking straight at the camera with an intensity that pierced through the screen. "My name is Julian Thorne," he said. His voice was deeper than people expected, articulate and cold. "I am not a hostage. I am a witness." The comments froze for a split second as the internet reacted to hearing the silent heir speak. "My father's company, Thorne Heavy Industries, is bleeding," Julian continued. He held up the crumpled pages from the library, now smoothed out and covered in his frantic, brilliant handwriting. The EBITDA logs for the last 12 quarters show a discrepancy, a redirection of funds disguised as fuel surcharges in the logistics division. He held the paper closer to the lens. Arthur Penn. Bianca St. James. They created a shell company called Apex Horizon. The money flows there. $420 million. Elena watched the view count hit 2 million. They have been drugging me, Julian said, his voice cracking slightly. Not to help me, to keep me from counting. Because when I count, the numbers don't lie. People lie. Numbers do not. Elena stepped back into the frame. Silas Thorne, if you are watching this, look at the ledger. Look at the logistics manifests. Your son isn't broken. He's the only one who was paying attention. Suddenly the sound of sirens cut through the air. Red and blue lights flashed against the thin curtains of the motel window. They're here, Elena whispered. Julian looked at the door. 7 minutes. They were early. Open up! Police! A bullhorn boomed from outside. Elena grabbed the phone. Please, she begged the millions of people watching. Don't let them bury him again. Record this. Share this. Don't let him be invisible. Crash. The motel door splintered inward as a battering ram hit the lock. Heavily armed SWAT officers poured into the room. Hands in the air. Get on the ground. Elena dropped the phone. It landed face up on the carpet. The live stream captured the chaos from a low angle. It showed boots stomping into the room. It showed Julian raising his hands, terrified, reverting to his rocking motion as the noise overwhelmed him. Don't hurt him, Elena screamed off camera. He has sensory processing issues. Don't touch him. Secure the hostage, an officer yelled. I am not a hostage, Julian shouted, a sound of pure desperation. An officer tackled Elena, pinning her to the ground. The camera shook. Julian, Elena cried out. Pattern, Julian screamed back. Elena, the pattern is broken. A heavy boot stepped on the phone, cracking the screen. The image distorted, then went black. The stream ended. But 5 million people had seen it. And within 10 minutes, the hashtag #Don'tYouLetJulianSpeak was trending #1 worldwide. The interrogation room at the 19th precinct was a box of concrete and bad intentions. It had been 48 hours since the motel door was kicked in. Elena sat handcuffed to a steel table, the metal biting into her wrists, her head resting on her arms. The room smelled of stale coffee and unwashed bodies. She was exhausted. Her throat was raw from screaming Julian's name as they dragged him away. They hadn't told her where he was. They hadn't told her anything other than the fact that she was facing charges of kidnapping, extortion, and endangerment of a vulnerable adult. The district attorney was apparently looking to make an example of her. The door buzzed, a harsh electric sound that made her jump. She sat up, bracing herself for another round with the bad cop detective who had been screaming in her face about brainwashing the billionaire's son. But it wasn't the detective. The heavy steel door swung open and Silas Thorne walked in. He looked like a man who had survived a plane crash. His suit, usually armored perfection, was wrinkled. His tie was missing. The top button of his shirt was undone, revealing a pale, strained neck. But it was his eyes that terrified Elena. The eyes of the Iron King were red-rimmed, sunken, and haunted. He didn't have a lawyer with him. He was holding a file folder. The guard outside moved to close the door. Mr. Thorne, you have 5 minutes. The DA advised against this. Leave us, Silas barked, his voice hoarse, but still carrying the weight of command. The door clicked shut. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Where is he? Elena asked, her voice cracking. If you put him back in that white room with those pills, you might as well kill him. Silas didn't answer immediately. He pulled out a metal chair and sat down opposite her. The screech of the chair legs against the floor was the only sound in the room. He placed the folder on the table and slid it toward her. "Open it," he said. Elena hesitated. Her hands were shaking as she flipped the cover open. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't a restraining order. It was a spreadsheet, a forensic accounting report. "I watched the video," Silas said quietly. "The one you live-streamed. I watched it 5 times. Then I watched it 5 more times." Elena looked up at him. And then I went to the server room," Silas continued, staring at his own hands as if they were covered in blood. "I locked the doors. I fired the external auditors, and I did the math myself. I haven't done raw accounting since I started the company 30 years ago. But I did it last night." He pointed a trembling finger at the document. "Julian was right, down to the decimal point." Elena felt the air rush out of her lungs. "Bianca and Arthur," Silas said, the names tasting like bile in his mouth. "They didn't just steal. They built a parasite inside my company. Apex Horizon, a shell corporation. They were siphoning off logistics overages, maintenance costs, fuel surcharges. $420 million over 3 years. He looked up, meeting Elena's eyes. "And they were funding it by cutting corners on safety equipment. If this had gone on another year, people would have died." "Julian saw it," Elena whispered. "He tried to tell you." "He tried," Silas nodded, a tear tracking through the stubble on his cheek. "He tried to tell me about the numbers, but I only saw the rocking. I only saw the hands flapping. I only heard the noise." Silas leaned forward, his face crumbling. "I was so obsessed with the image of perfection that I couldn't see the genius in front of me. I drugged him, Ms. Russo. I paid doctors to keep him in a fog because I was ashamed. I thought he was broken." "He isn't broken," Elena said fiercely. "He's just on a different frequency. You were the one who wasn't listening." "I know," Silas wept. The billionaire buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I know that now. Arthur and Bianca are in federal custody. The FBI arrested them at Teterboro Airport, trying to flee the country. Your live stream, it triggered an automatic SEC investigation. You didn't just expose them, you saved the company." Elena felt a wave of relief, so strong it made her dizzy. "So I can go?" Silas looked up, wiping his eyes. "The charges are dropped. You are a free woman. But I have a request, a favor I have no right to ask." "What?" "Julian," Silas said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He's at Mount Sinai Hospital. He hasn't spoken since the SWAT team breached the door. He's in a catatonic stupor. The doctors call it a shutdown. He won't eat. He won't drink. He just stares at the wall." Silas stood up, looking helpless for the first time in his life. "He won't respond to me. He won't respond to the doctors. Please, Elena. Wake him up." The private wing of Mount Sinai was quiet, but it was a terrifying kind of quiet. It was the silence of a machine that had been unplugged. When Elena walked into the room, flanked by Silas and a team of neurologists, her heart broke. Julian was sitting in the corner of the room, not on the bed. He had pulled the sheets off and wrapped himself in them like a cocoon. He was rocking. Not the gentle rhythmic rocking from the gala, but a violent, jerky motion. Back and forth, hitting his head lightly against the padded wall with every backward motion. His eyes were open, but they were empty. The brilliant, calculating light she had seen in the library was gone. He had retreated deep into his own mind, to a place where the noise of the world couldn't hurt him. "He's been like this for 30 hours. Dr. Evans," the head of neurology, whispered to Elena. "We're considering sedation to get fluids into him." "No sedation," Elena said sharply. "No more drugs. That's what started this." She kicked off her shoes. She needed to be grounded. She needed to be quiet. "Everyone out," she commanded. "Ms. Russo, medical protocol dictates—" Dr. Evans started. "Get out," Silas Thorne roared, turning on the doctor. "Do as she says." The room cleared. The door clicked shut. It was just Elena and the boy who counted the world. She didn't rush him. She didn't touch him. She walked to the center of the room and sat down on the floor, crossing her legs. She was about 10 feet away from him. She waited. The rocking continued. Thump, thump, thump. Elena closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of his distress. It was fast, chaotic. It was a prime number beat. 7/8 time, irregular, panicked. She began to tap her hand on the floor. She didn't match his rhythm. She introduced a counter rhythm, a slow, steady 4/4 beat. Tap, 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 tap. She did this for 5 minutes. Julian didn't stop, but the intensity of his rocking lessened. His brain, always seeking patterns, was picking up on the new variable in the room. Then she began to hum. She chose the song from the night they met. Debussy's Clair de Lune. But she hummed it slowly, stripping away the complexity, leaving only the mathematical skeleton of the melody. Julian's head stopped hitting the wall. He froze. "The sequence," Elena whispered into the space between them. "It's incomplete, Julian. I forgot the next integer." She waited. Julian's hand emerged from the sheet. His fingers twitched. "1," Elena said. Julian's shoulder tensed. "1," Elena repeated. "2," a voice rasped. It sounded like sandpaper, dry and unused. Elena's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. 3. 5, Julian whispered. 8, Elena counted. 13, Julian said, his voice getting stronger. He turned his head. The sheet fell away from his face. He looked pale, dark circles under his eyes. But he was there. He was back in the room. "Fibonacci," he murmured. "The spiral." "The spiral always comes back to the center," Elena said softly. "You're safe here, Julian. The variables have changed." Julian looked at the door. The loud men. The boots. "Gone," Elena promised. "And the pills are gone. And the white room is gone." Julian looked at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. He was running the probability calculations in his head. He saw her scraped wrists from the handcuffs. He saw the dirt on her clothes from the motel floor. He realized she had fought for him. Slowly, painfully, Julian uncurled his legs. He crawled across the floor, not standing up, just moving until he was sitting in front of her. He respected the 6-inch gap. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out something small. It was the fidget spinner he had offered her weeks ago. He spun it on the floor between them. They watched it spin in silence. "My father," Julian said, watching the blur of the plastic. "He cried." "He did," Elena said. "He never cries. It is statistically an anomaly." "He's sorry, Julian. He finally did the math." The door opened a crack. Silas stood there, watching. He looked at his son, sitting on the floor, lucid, safe. Silas walked in. He didn't stride like a CEO. He walked slowly. He stopped a few feet away. "Julian," Silas said. Julian didn't flinch. He looked up at his father. "I fired them," Silas said. "Arthur, Bianca, all of them, and Dr. Aris." Julian nodded once. "Acceptable." Silas knelt down. His knees cracked. A human sound. "I want to restructure the company, Julian. But I can't do it. I can't see the numbers the way you do. I need a consultant, a partner." Julian tilted his head. "A job?" "A career," Silas corrected. "On your terms, your office, your lighting, your hours, no touching, no crowds." Julian looked at the spinning toy. And Eleanor? Silas looked at the waitress. Eleanor stays, as long as she wants, whatever salary she wants. She's the only one who knows the steps. Julian reached out his hand. For a second, Silas thought he was going to shake hands, but Julian bypassed the handshake. He reached out and adjusted Silas's collar, which was crooked. Symmetry, Julian whispered. Better. Silas let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. Thank you, son. The winter snow had melted, and the spring gala season was in full swing in New York City. The Phoenix Ball was being held at the Plaza, the same room where Eleanor had been thrown out into the street half a year ago. But tonight, the mood was different. The guest list had changed. The sycophants and the gossip mongers were largely gone, weeded out by the new administration of Thorn Industries. The room was filled with innovators, mathematicians, engineers, and artists. Elena stood on the balcony overlooking the ballroom. She wore a dress of silver silk that flowed like water. She wasn't holding a tray of champagne. She was holding a tablet, checking the lighting levels for the third time. Lux levels are optimal at 300, a voice said beside her. Eleanor smiled and turned. Julian stood there. He looked magnificent. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo made of soft, non-irritating velvet. He had noise-cancelling earbuds that were sleek and modern, designed to filter out the roar of the crowd while allowing conversation. He stood tall, his posture confident. "You're late for your speech," Elena teased. "I am precisely on time," Julian corrected, checking his watch. The opening remarks ran 2 minutes over. I adjusted my arrival vector accordingly. He looked down at the ballroom. "They are waiting for the head of analytics." "They're waiting for you, Julian." Since the scandal broke, the world had fallen in love with Julian Thorn. The silent heir had become an icon for neurodiversity. His story had forced a conversation in boardrooms across America about how different minds could solve problems that traditional thinking couldn't touch. Thorn Industries' stock was up 200% since Julian took over the audit department. Silas Thorn was down there too. He was laughing, actually laughing, with a group of investors. He looked younger, lighter. He waved up at them. Julian waved back, a stiff, formal wave, but a wave nonetheless. "Are you ready to go down?" Elena asked. Julian looked at the stairs. Then he looked at her. "The Fibonacci sequence," he said suddenly. "What about it?" "It is perfect because it grows," Julian said. "It expands. It doesn't stay in a loop. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. It gets bigger." He stepped closer to her, invading the 6-inch gap for the first time. "My world was a 0, Julian said, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Then you added a 1. And now it is infinite." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "Julian, I have calculated the probability of a successful dance," he stated, "with the current floor density and the tempo of the music. And the probability is 100%, he said, if you are the variable." He held out his hand, not in a demand, but in an invitation. Elena placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and real. They walked down the grand staircase together. The room went silent as they entered, but Julian didn't flinch. He didn't look at his shoes. He looked straight ahead, holding the hand of the woman who had taught him that he didn't have to be invisible to be safe. The orchestra conductor, who had been briefed extensively on the acceptable decibel levels, raised his baton. The music began. It wasn't a classic waltz. It was a custom piece, written by a composer Julian admired. It was mathematical, intricate, weaving polyrhythms into a tapestry of sound. To anyone else, it might have been hard to dance to. But for Julian and Elena, it was breathing. They moved to the center of the floor. They spun, they stepped, they mirrored each other's movements with a telepathic connection that mesmerized the room. Silas watched from the sidelines, a glass of sparkling water in his hand, beaming with pride. As the music swelled to a crescendo, Julian did something he had never done. He stepped in, closed the frame, and placed his hand gently on Eleanor's waist. He spun her, a perfect, geometric spiral, and caught her. The crowd erupted into applause. Julian looked at Eleanor, a rare, genuine smile breaking across his face. "What comes next?" Eleanor asked, breathless. "Everything," Julian said. "Everything comes next." And that brings us to the end of the rhythm of silence. What started as a heartbreaking moment of a billionaire's son being ignored by the world turned into a story of redemption, justice, and the power of seeing people for who they really are. I think the most powerful moment was Silas admitting that he was the one who was blind, not his son. It really shows that sometimes the disability isn't in the person, but in the environment that refuses to accommodate them. Julian wasn't broken. He was just speaking a language no one else was willing to learn, until Elena did. If this story touched your heart, or if you cheered when Julian finally exposed the corruption, please smash that like button. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next drama.